Good afternoon. First, let me compliment and congratulate all of you at IIM Trichy for reaching this very important milestone. My earlier visit to IIM Trichy was actually at the NIT Trichy campus. So I'm really happy that I'm here for the first time at your beautiful campus. The last time I came, I actually came to teach business ethics. I was just remembering. I took a session for the students at that time. I think it was 2012. And you can see that lots of things have happened in my life also in the interim. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you and congratulations to the Institute. As you heard from Professor P.K. Singh, there are several personal connections as well which bring me here today. One is of course that Professor Pavan Singh was my colleague in IIM Indore and we worked closely together, which he already mentioned. But also interestingly, my ancestors actually come from not very far from here. So though I haven't got much connection to my so-called native place, one of the things which Professor Pavan Singh used to lure me here was to say you could go and visit that place. So I'm also happy that this has been an excuse to come back to this particular area. So thank you Pavanji for inviting me. So while IIM Trichy is celebrating its 14th foundation day or 14th anniversary, I just look back at my own career and I realize I've actually spent 34 years in IIMs. That's quite a long period by any stretch of imagination. I entered IIM Ahmedabad as a PhD student, or FPM as it was called at that time, in 1991. I then went on to become a faculty member at IIM Bangalore in 1996. In between, of course, I took a detour to be director of IIM Indore for 5 years. And during that period, Pavanji, I and other colleagues also set up IIM Sambalpur. And then, of course, I returned to IIM Bangalore and became the director. So you've actually seen that more than half my life has actually been spent in the IIM system. So I thought I will use this opportunity to basically share with all of you what have I learned from this journey over the last 33, 34 years. And in the process, I'll also share what I think are the implications of that, both for students and faculty colleagues here at IIM Trichy. So let me just go back first to the time when I entered IIM Ahmedabad as a student. So interestingly, that was a very momentous year. I joined IIM Ahmedabad as a student in 1991. You all know what was happening in 1991, that was economic liberalization. We had our orientation program in June 1991. Some of you might know that the 1st July 1991 was when the new industrial policy statement of India was released, which essentially brought together all the various facets of liberalization. Now, as you can imagine, this was a very exciting time because the country itself was changing its philosophy and changing its approach to economic growth. In fact, it was so exciting that the faculty members at IIM Ahmedabad had to literally revise their courses as we were going through the first year. In those days, the FPM and PGP had common courses in the first year. And I remember in the second term, we had a course on macroeconomics, which also looked at the Indian economy. The faculty had to literally throw away all their old notes and they had to really design the course afresh because the whole economic policy environment in India had completely changed. So I think that also reflects one good point about the IIMs as a system, that we are quite responsive to change. I think we are quite quick at understanding what are the implications of things that are happening around us and then sharing those with the students. And I think that's one characteristic we all need to retain, sustain and carry forward. And that's equally relevant to all of you students as well. Another thing which struck me when I was a student at IIM Ahmedabad was that the faculty did very little spoon feeding. We were all expected to come to the class fully prepared. In fact, some of the professors would not answer questions at all. They would expect you to develop the answer. In fact, we had some legendary professors in marketing like Professor Abhinandan J, and we had Professor Mote in quantitative methods. And they would simply, just keep badgering you with questions. They would never really in a way give you a direct answer. One good implication of this is we all learn to think on our feet. And I think that's one thing I hope and I'm reasonably confident that all of you in IIM Trichy are able to do as well. Another thing they were very conscious of and very sensitive to was the fact that we all need to be able to think from first principles. We need to be able to develop critical thinking. In fact, I don't know what happens these days in MBA programs, like you go through, But interestingly, for example, in marketing, I never even opened Kotler's book, even though it was the prescribed reading. Because in all our exams, we were really expected to develop things from scratch. In fact, if you use too much jargon in the exam, you used to get very poor marks. And the faculty, they weren't very encouraging of that. They expected you to analyze the case, come up with your own insights, and not just reproduce what was in the textbook. That really helped all the PGP students in IIM Ahmedabad get really good jobs. Because remember, this was the time when the economy was opening up. There wasn't a whole lot of data. People had to really think afresh. And that kind of a perspective where they had learned through the case method, they had learned to think on their feet, really helped them develop the kind of perspective which was required to succeed in a competitive economy. Another important thing I think which our previous speaker, Mr. Tangavel, also underlined was the importance of communication. One thing I realized at IIM Ahmedabad was almost all the students who are my PGP batchmates when I was doing FPM were very good in communication, and in some ways that's what really helped them in their career. I mean, of course they were smart, they did well in CAT, all that goes without saying. But the fact that they could communicate very clearly is something which really enabled them to establish themselves. Self-confidence, self-motivation, self-discipline. I think this was something which again Institute nurtured very well in all of us. And I would urge all of you to really find a way of developing this in yourselves, because this is really something that's very important. But another thing that also struck me at IIM Ahmedabad, and I think this is something we all need to worry about both as individuals as institutions, is that IIM Ahmedabad at that time was not very quick to change. In fact, if you look at the program portfolio of IIM Ahmedabad, for almost, I mean, IIM Ahmedabad has been in existence now for more than 60 years. If you look at it, the program portfolio has not changed all that much. And I think that may not be the best thing, because the environment is actually changing quite quickly. So while it's good to be successful, it's probably not good to be too invested in your earlier success, but you need to question all the assumptions that are behind whatever choices you have made and make whatever changes are required. When I joined IIM Bangalore as a faculty member, I actually saw something quite different. IIM Bangalore at that time was not the perception of IIM Bangalore at that time was not quite the same as it is today. In fact, when I was a student, when I went to IIM and so on, IIM Bangalore was number 3 and seen much below both Ahmedabad and Calcutta. But what has happened over the last approximately 25-30 years at IIM Bangalore is quite interesting, because not only has the institute now clearly come to the top and on par with IIM Ahmedabad, sometimes even better in some of the rankings, but what has actually happened is the institute has really changed over the years. And here I would just like to point out that I think one characteristic which IIM Bangalore has demonstrated over time is the ability to identify changes in the environment and to come up with both academic offerings as well as research programs that respond effectively to those. I just give you a couple of examples. So you all know today that the Indian IT industry is something we are all very proud of. But in 1998, the Indian IT industry was nowhere near what it is today. In fact, some of you who know a little bit about business history would know that it is solving the Y2K problem around the year 2000. That was really the growth push for the Indian IT industry. But in 1998, IIM Bangalore, in collaboration with the IT industry, at least the major software companies, realized there was going to be a need for a significant number of good managers to drive growth. So even before Y2K, even before the trend was completely clear, I think visionary leaders from the industry as well as the leadership of IIM Bangalore realized that this was going to be a trend coming forward. And we set up a weekend MBA program to meet the needs of the IT industry. This was also funded quite generously by Wipro and other companies. And that weekend MBA program that we set up at that time has now become a major source of the top managerial talent for the IT and IT services industry. So this is just one example to show the importance of being able to really identify opportunities, capitalize on them, build on them, and then really create a new future. Another interesting thing happened many years later. In 2014, I went to Indore and a new gentleman came as the director of IIM Bangalore. His name was Sushil Vachani. He flew in directly from Boston. It's the first time we got a director who came directly from the US. And in Boston, what he had seen was that the whole shape and profile of education was changing. Online education was becoming important. Some of you might know that's around the time Coursera and edX and all these online platforms were just beginning to take off. So he came with a very interesting agenda. He came with the agenda that IIM Bangalore needs to be a leader in online education. And in fact, he was our director for a very short period of time, I think just over 2 years. But in that time, he set up IIMB's presence in MOOCs. IIMB became a partner of edX. Today, IIMB has more than 80 courses available online. IIMB is the national coordinator for management for SWAYAM. We today offer an online BBA program in digital business and entrepreneurship. We have at least 2 or 3 major certificate programs for hospital management, AI, etc. All of this happened because at that time in 2014, Sushil Vachani was able to see the importance of online learning and bring it in as an important capability to IIM Bangalore. I think this is equally relevant to all of you students here. As your careers develop, as you see things changing, and particularly in a rapidly changing technology environment as we see today, your ability to understand what are the important trends and changes, prepare yourself for them, and then actually make the right moves in the direction will be very important. I think equally important, and this is something I would like to address to our faculty colleagues here at IIM Trichy, is we need a good dose of academic entrepreneurship. You need people within academic institutions who can take these new ideas, run with them and make them happen. And one of the challenges I see today, I think we've all become very research focused. We've all become, much more academic in that sense. But very clearly, to meet the needs of industry, to meet the needs of the country, and to meet the needs of our institutions, we need more academic entrepreneurs. We need professors who are willing to step out of their normal routine, take up 1 or 2 of these big ideas and really make them happen. And that's equally important for all of you students. I think it's not about whether you will start a startup. It's about whether you will be able to demonstrate and display entrepreneurship in whatever context you are situated. In fact, at IIMB, we now have a course on entrepreneurial mindset as a compulsory course in the first year in PGP. The reason we have that course is not that we expect everybody to go and create startups. But the reason we have that course is we expect that in the kind of fast-changing environment in which we find ourselves today, you will need managers who can identify those opportunities and then convert them into actual business models and then really translate them into action. Professor Pawan Singh mentioned my tenure at IIM Indore. It was a very fulfilling period for me. And I also learned a few things from my experience there as the director. One thing I learned is that it's very important to build on what has already been created in the institution. Sometimes when you go to a new institution, you have a tendency to think, I just want to show what great things I can do. And to make that happen, I will try to just belittle or try to set aside what has been done earlier. I would just recommend to all of you in the student community as well, don't do that. It's much more constructive in the long run to build on what was created already. And I think that's a nice thing that happened in Indore. My predecessor was quite a creative gentleman, Professor Ravichandran. He started what has today become the signature of IIM Indore in a way, which is the IPM, or Integrated Program in Management. At that time, it was a very bold step. No IIM had gone into undergrad education. Integrated program concept did not exist. IIM Indore could not even give degrees. Remember, in those days, we could only give PG diplomas. But in spite of that, he decided to try out this idea. When I came in, there were lots of doubts about it. It was just 2 or 3 years old. It started in 2011. In fact, the same year IIM Trichy started. And when I walked in 2014, January, there were lots of doubts, skeptics, all the rest. But I decided, we have to make this work. We have to make this successful. There's no point in rubbishing it. Let's try to really make it into a very successful program. And with the collaboration and cooperation of all our faculty in IIM Indore, today IPM is really seen as an important differentiator in management education. So to me, the lesson was very clear. I think we all need to figure out how can we build on what has been created already. And through that process, we can create much more value than we would be able to create just on our own. I think one of the challenges we've seen in India over the last few decades is the time it takes to bring an institution to critical mass. The government has, in its wisdom, tried to set up new institutions. Today we have 21 IIMs. We have, I don't know the exact number, 23 or 24 IITs. And many of these have been set up in the last 10 to 15 years. One of the big challenges is how do you bring these to scale? Now, one part of the scale story, Pawanji already alluded to, which is the infrastructure part. But I think one thing you will notice today in India, physical infrastructure is not really the big challenge. In fact, you go to private universities like I'm sure some of you have been, many of them have excellent physical infrastructure. The challenge is really in the intellectual infrastructure and your ability to not only run good academic programs, but also reach out to industry and bring a kind of entire the value chain into the institutional framework. So I think one of our challenges going forward, and I think that's what Pawanji was also mentioning, is how do you take off from this point? For example, from IIM Trichy's point of view, how do you take off from here? How do you really create that very distinctive institution for the future? By the way, it's not a question for IIM Trichy alone. Even at IIM Bangalore, we have the same challenge, but in a maybe slightly different way. You know, in general, in the Indian rankings, we are number 1 or number 2 in all rankings. In global rankings, we do well, but we are stuck in a range of 25 to 50, depending on the ranking agency and which program they are looking at. So we're very proud of the fact that all our programs are ranked in the top 50 in the world. But how do we break through, say, into the top 25? That's something which is not all that clear at this point of time. So I think whichever stage of the journey you're at, you still have all these challenges. You have to kind of look at new ways of really grappling with this whole thing. Okay, finally, let me just come to a few things at the individual level. So, you know, I had this very interesting experience several years ago. I thought I'll share it with you. This must be about 10, 15 years ago, probably around the time IIM Trichy was founded. One day I had an unexpected visitor. He was an alum from IIM Calcutta, and he had a very strong interest in building sustainable transportation solutions. I didn't know him at all. He just walked into my office one day, and he had this concept of how can you build a very sustainable transport system for India using EVs. Now just think about it. We are talking about EVs today, but he was talking about this maybe 15 years ago. And he came in and told me, you know, I want you to help me develop this concept, and more importantly, I want to help you get funding. So I sort of talked to him for a few minutes, and then I told him, look, I'm not a transportation expert. I don't understand what you're talking about. How can I help you? I told him I'll connect you to some people who know that area well. So he kind of got very upset with me. And then he said, you know what? The problem with you IIM professors is you all have aspiration deficit. You don't really have that burning desire to change things. Otherwise, if you had that, you would be just immediately, you know, working with me and making this happen. So looking back now, many years later, I think there is a small kernel of truth in what he was saying. It may not be about IIM professors alone, by the way. It could be about many others. That I really think we have to aspire and look to do things not only on a bigger scale, but also with much more depth and higher quality. I think that's really the kind of goal we all need to set for ourselves. There was a very successful management thinker. Your students, you may not have heard of him because he unfortunately passed away several years ago. A gentleman called Sumantra Ghoshal, who taught at INSEAD and London Business School. So Sumantra Ghoshal had a very interesting analysis of India. He says in India, the challenge is that we all suffer from satisfactory underperformance. I just repeat that, satisfactory underperformance. You might be wondering, what does this mean? It sounds like an oxymoron. What he actually meant is interesting. What he said was, we are all quite capable of achieving satisfactory performance. So you set any goal, we will sort of achieve that some way or the other. But we don't really perform to our full potential. That's what he called the underperformance. So in a way, I think this is related to the aspiration deficit thing I talked about a couple of minutes ago. So I'm just trying to urge all of you, whether you are faculty or whether you are students, please sort of reflect carefully on what are the goals we should set ourselves. If you're students, please don't settle for, I'm not against money by the way, so please do look for jobs with good money. But please take on jobs which have really good challenges to address. Please take on jobs which can really make impact. Please take on jobs which address critical problems. There are many of them outside there. Please take them on and try to address them. As an IIM alumnus, whichever IIM you come from, you will never be poor, you will never be on the street, nothing like that. You will all be quite well off economically, so that's not the problem. Try to do something which will really make a larger impact beyond the benefit it will have for you. And I can guarantee you there are literally thousands of problems visible in India and all over the world, which you can pick up and try to address. And I would urge you all to do that. I would similarly urge our faculty to be academic entrepreneurs, to take on some of these big challenges. And I don't think now it's a question of or. We all have to now find a way of doing things, and we have to do multiple things. We have to be really good scholars, we have to be really good teachers, we have to be able to take on these external challenges, all of these at the same time. And while doing all of this, we also have to ensure, and I'm just going back to the talk I gave PGP students in IIM Trichy all those years back, we have to ensure that we do them in an ethical and responsible way. I don't think there is any scope for shortcuts. And the only way we can do that is if we set excellence as our benchmark. We should really take the best benchmarks anywhere in the world and try and make sure that we get to those benchmarks. So once again, let me thank you all for inviting me to IIM Trichy. Happy birthday, as Professor Pawan Singh said, happy birthday to all of you and to the Institute. And I wish you all well, but I would really urge you all to just think about what are the really impactful challenges you can take on and play whatever small role you can towards achieving those challenges. Thank you.